subtitle. Welcome everyone to the University of Phoenix Educational Equity webinar series. Today's topic is leading inclusively in times of crisis and beyond. We are looking forward to hearing from our exceptional speaker today. This series was created with the hope to foster a learning environment where we can explore paths to empower individual action toward greater unity and impact change. As a higher education institution with more than 56% underrepresented students employed across different industries. It is our hope to facilitate thought-provoking conversations, to prepare and encourage the practice of inclusive leadership in a culturally complex society. So just a little housekeeping before we get started. We do highly encourage you to engage in the chat, connect with one another, share your LinkedIn profiles, and helpful resources related to today's topic. If you have any questions during the presentation, please type them into the question box in your control panel at the bottom of your screen. Your questions will be brought up at the end, and we may also have time for additional Q&A. Please note that you also have the option of voting for the questions that you would like to be asked. My name is 𝙤𝙪 𝙧𝙚. I am a director here in the Office of Educational Equity at the University of Phoenix. I am thrilled to work with my colleague, 𝙬𝙧 Lopez, in bringing you this important content today. I'll go ahead and turn it over to you now, 𝙬𝙧.
Thank you and welcome everyone. So joining us today is the best-selling author of Inclusion, Diversity, The New Workplace and the Will to Change, and her latest book, How to Be an Inclusive Leader, Your Role in Creating Cultures of Belonging Where Everyone Can Thrive. Jennifer Brown. So Jennifer Brown is an award-winning entrepreneur, dynamic speaker, and expert in diversity and inclusion. During today's session, we are so excited because we'll be discussing how to actively and intentionally infuse diversity, equity, and inclusion into everyday practices while we're leading our teams, our students, organizations, and our communities, especially in what a world will look like post-COVID pandemic and post the need to really have these types of discussions. So more than anything, we thought of Jennifer to join us. I have to say I'm geeking out here as I've been following her work for a few years now. My colleague 𝙤𝙪 and I were huge fans of her community calls and Will to Change podcast. If you have not been listening to these, please make sure you join them. So without further ado, please we'll turn over the time to Jennifer. Thank you, Jennifer.
Thank you so much, 𝙬𝙧 and 𝙤𝙪, and hello, University of Phoenix community. I'm so glad to be here today. Yeah, as has been explained, I want this to be super helpful for all of you. I want this to be a place where you can ask questions, comment, and so please follow the directions that were indicated, meaning using that Q&A box and you know, go in there, vote people's questions up if they're ones that you have as well. Or please ask your question, particularly as we go, because I promise you, as we go, you may want to respond to a concept that I talk about in the presentation portion of this. And I don't want you to forget it. So record it either in chat and we'll see it, but ideally in the Q&A. And then, as I said, you know the feature around being able to vote up certain questions that you have as well. And I'm really looking forward to the second part of our time together where we can have that Q&A portion. Honestly, it's my favorite part because we get to learn together. I learn as much from you all as hopefully you will learn from me and what I have to share today. So let's get into the deck and you'll hear me leaning on the team to advance our slides. But for now, on this slide, I just want to draw everybody's attention to the QR code at the bottom right of your screen. I know you all are, in the pandemic world, this is how we get our menus, right? Please hover over this QR code if you'd like to find out more information about some of the assets that we've mentioned so far. So we have weekly community calls, which are free to attend, and I really do recommend everybody jump on there at noon Eastern on Thursdays, and you just simply need to RSVP. So information on that is in the QR code, a free download of the first chapter of the book. We have an inclusive leader assessment that's also free that takes about 10 minutes to take and again kind of gives you some additional pieces to reflect on in your own journey. podcast information, all sorts of good stuff. So please do check that out and get in touch with us, follow us, learn from us and with us. We would be really happy to have you. And so let's get into what I brought for you today. If we can go to the next slide. I always like to share my personal diversity story, or stories, plural, many of which aren't apparent in me. So especially important for us to share those invisible aspects of diversity. I actually was a nonprofit activist in my 20s. So I've always worked in the space of creating change, but I was also a singer. So I had the opportunity to come to New York and study operatic vocal performance. Lucky me, it was the dream of a lifetime. And in the course of operatic training, though, I injured my voice because who knows why. I'm a very intense type A person. And I continued to injure it, and I had to get several vocal surgeries. So the same problem kept recurring. And after surgery, you have to be completely silent for a period of many weeks as things heal. And what comes out when you're finally permitted to make a sound is a tiny, high-pitched squeak. And so you coax your voice back through physical therapy, but I knew my instrument would be forever compromised and I wouldn't be able to have the career that I wanted. So heartbroken, defeated, confused, I had to find another career. And luckily I found a career that a lot of ex-performers find their way to, strangely, and I didn't even know existed, which is the field of training and development. And that means that you teach adults, you facilitate adult learning in the organizational setting traditionally. And I would segue into that world, get a degree in what's called organizational development, organizational change, and leadership and learning. And I fell in love with the field. I had HR roles for a while internally, and then I started my own company about 14 years ago and grew my team. And today we get to work across mainly the Fortune 1000 to build more inclusive organizations where all of us can feel welcomed, valued, respected, and heard. And so I like to say I was meant to use my voice, just not as a singer. But the second way I wasn't using my voice is I'm a member of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer plus community, LGBTQ plus. And I've been out since I was 22, but closeted as a performer, for sure, worried that contracts would be taken off the table for me, access, performance opportunities, my way to make a living. And then as an entrepreneur, I also worried about it. And I have to say, today I'm a very proud woman-owned and LGBT-owned and certified company. So we are considered a diverse supplier, particularly for those Fortune 1000 companies that are looking to diversify that supply chain and looking for those innovative partnerships. But the closet has never really been far away from my thoughts. And if we go to the next slide, there's another word that I discovered through some research that was done at Deloitte with Hendji and Christy Smith. Hendji wrote a book called Covering, which I would really recommend everybody read. He's a beautiful writer. He's an NYU constitutional law professor, but he is a gay Asian man, parent, professor, as I said, and talks about this concept of covering, which means downplaying a known stigmatized identity. And, still when I walk into rooms these days where I look around and at least from what I can see and what I think I see, more on that later, I don't see my diversity or my identity reflected in a given room. My instinct is to downplay, right? To minimize. And I spend time and energy doing this calculation, thinking about, am I going to be seen and heard in this environment? Am I going to be able to be the authority, which, by the way, I usually am these days, because I've written some books on inclusion, and I'm there because my help is needed. But I raise this example because even somebody that should be as comfortable as I am goes through the math of sort of distancing myself from my identities because I want to make sure that I'm heard. And just the fact that I do that dance with my authenticity, right, with my identities, both visible and invisible, say as a woman and LGBTQ person, to name two, shows us that so many others are doing this, having this struggle of identity and authenticity and having to bargain and having to make really difficult choices and putting a lot of energy towards that, because that's what it feels like for me. It feels like a giant energy suck and a total distraction. And I've learned how to overcome it and still perform, but I know that that is the performer discipline in me, right? And it shouldn't take that. It shouldn't be necessary. So on the next slide, I want to go into the kinds of covering we engage in and see if some of this resonates with all of you. And I would love to hear in chat, just, how does this resonate? Like, how have you experienced any of these? And do you engage in covering behaviors in your life, in your workplace, any sort of group you're a part of? And look at this number, 61% of us report doing this on a regular basis. So that's a really high number in every organization that's, I think spending energy where it could be spent elsewhere, right? And so this is the way I talk to employers about what the stakes are of this conversation are actually incredibly high from an energy perspective, from a belonging perspective, from a retention perspective. So appearance-based covering, I like to use the example of gender identity, for example. We expect gender norms and gender expression norms, right? The binary female, binary, masculine male. And yet, more and more people, particularly under the age of 35, identify as non-binary. And so when we're appearance-based covering, though, I may, go towards a binary in terms of my expression when, to make others comfortable versus stand up for the true gender expression that I really am most comfortable in, right? Which would be a gender non-binary or gender fluid expression. And so that covering of identity there takes a ton of energy and, really makes us feel smaller, I think less than, because the act of covering, I think, diminishes our sense of self. But we do it. We do it for safety. We do it to survive. We do it for professional image and all these other things and career management. But it doesn't mean that it doesn't take a toll on us. Affiliation-based covering is when we purposely distance ourselves from being affiliated with a stigmatized group. I often use the example of parenting, actually, and parents, whether we're planning family, whether we're worried about the impact on our career, whether we're thinking about how much leave we want to take, whether we're thinking about, do I lobby for a flexible or part-time work arrangement? We hesitate, right? We don't want to talk about it until we absolutely have to. And even, fathers, particularly interesting, don't take advantage of parental leave that's offered in a lot of companies and employers. We wish it were more were offered, but even in countries where a lot of generous parental leave is offered, we still see that stigma keeping fathers in particular away from taking advantage of leave. And I think that that is a very clear-cut example of affiliation-based covering, meaning I don't want it said that I'm not serious about my job or serious about my career. I don't want to be affiliated with this because of the impact to me. And so what happens is then our needs and our desires don't get met, they go unmet. And I think this is such a harmful dynamic to have between talent and the employer, but it's happening all the time. So that's affiliation-based covering. Advocacy-based covering is when we hesitate from challenging a joke or a comment that is harmful to us, say a microaggression, or as an ally, somebody that hesitates advocating for a group that we are passionate about being in solidarity with, but we sense that we don't want to be the squeaky wheel. We sense that advocating too much or too loudly is going to penalize us. And so we go silent, or we don't raise things that are, incorrect or harmful. And, ultimately then we deprive others and organizations of that learning that could happen when we do challenge language and comments. It's so important. But there's a very good reason why we cover when it comes to advocacy, because we sense that penalty. So it's real. And then finally, association, quickly, similar to affiliation, but I think of it more in the old physical workplace. It used to be a wonderful example to say, if people see us congregating, and us could be anything, the Black employees, the LGBTQ employees congregating in a conference room, what are they talking about? It can't possibly be constructive or a positive conversation. And I think we still battle this, being seen around too many people that identify as we do, or can have negative impact. And so what do we do? The covering behavior, I think, is the distancing, the sort of over-rotating towards being extremely objective, so that nobody can ever say I'm positively biased towards people that look like me or identify as I do. So as an LGBTQ manager, I might I might studiously avoid hiring other LGBTQ people because I don't want to have it said that I have that bias. And so therefore I am association-based covering. I'm literally avoiding being seen to be associated. And I think, this comes true in companies' diversity, equity, and inclusion activities as well. There are some people that say, I don't want to be a part of the affinity group. I don't want to raise my hand and have people think of that when they think of me. I want them to judge me based on my work product, et cetera, right? So there still is a very, unfortunately, alive stigma about associating ourselves with this very conversation, which is honestly what really needs to change. And so on the next slide, those of us who have been underrepresented and in marginalized identities cover the most. So you'll see these numbers from the research are higher than that 61% I showed in the last slide. And when you take into account the intersections of these identities, no one of us is one thing. We're many things, and many of us are more than one underrepresented or marginalized or stigmatized identity, right? And so then it becomes a question of, from the covering perspective, you talk about like complex choices, right? Like people can see this about me, but they can't see this, this, and this about me. So I'm just going to cover those things. I'm going to minimize them and sort of avoid and not bring up or not emphasize them. And then because I have enough to manage just given this one identity that is apparent to everybody. And so it just takes so much energy. I'll tell you just an LGBTQ statistic that is disturbing on this front is nearly half of us in the community are closeted in the workplace. So nearly half of us. And that is a statistic from 2019 from the Human Rights Campaign, which is kind of our benchmark for workplace advocacy. So nearly half of us are lying about who we are, who we love, what we did over the weekend, what we stand up for, et cetera. So you can imagine, that community is a bit of a canary in the coal mine from a psychological safety perspective. The other covering behaviors sort of mirror that. All right, so next slide. Oh, and there's so much good sharing happening in chat. Thank you. I would love to react to all of these, but please do share your experience of any of these kinds of covering, and particularly the cost that you feel it has. What has it cost you? What has that tax been that you've paid over the years? And it can be subtle, but it really adds up. I call it death by 1,000 cuts. It's very subtle, but when it adds up and at some point we're just really fatigued, and we don't have the energy to hang in there anymore, that's when I feel like we leave institutions. And so we've got to be aware that that chipping away is happening with our employees. And when I speak to leaders, I make this point to say, we don't want this to be occurring. We need to really study this, understand it, mitigate it, hopefully, eradicate it, although, not in my lifetime, I'm sure, but we have to be dedicated to and really invested in looking into this, because it's getting in the way of performance and potential for a whole generation of people. This slide is a very, very typical of the rooms I walk into. So I work mainly with executive teams. And as you all probably know, there's the least visible diversity from a race and ethnicity perspective and gender perspective. There's a lot of diversity dimensions that are going on for a group that looks like this. They're not visible. And if we do one more click, team, thank you. 45% of straight white men report covering too. This is in the research. And some of these thought bubbles are, you might think I'm trying to be funny, but actually people bring things up to me quietly, privately. They feel very like nobody's really invited them in to have this conversation traditionally. So I find it really a wonderful challenge that I have to create the kind of space to bring up those invisible diversity dimensions and also broaden the number of diversity dimensions we talk about, whether that's socioeconomics, mental health, addiction, disabilities, and how they touch our families, being in a mixed race marriage, having children, adopted children, being a single parent. The list just goes on and on. So really has been incredible to learn how many invisible aspects of diversity exist in all of us, and how to make sure I'm propping that door open for all of these to be recognized and talked about. And what that does then is welcome groups that look like this into the conversation in ways that I think we haven't done a great job of in the past. And I also want to say, I walk into rooms like this and I have my own biases. And so the part of the work I've been tasked with is walking the talk when it comes to being truly inclusive, right? And you know, not believing what I think I see or my lens in terms of interpreting people's identity, because we are often very wrong. And I use myself as an example. You know, if I walk on stage, nobody would maybe know I'm LGBTQ unless I shared that. And it's part of my challenge is to share it, to make sure whether I'm comfortable or not, you know, raising these invisible aspects of diversity to the surface and speaking about them is the way that we change the world. We make the invisible visible. Really, really important. And so on the next slide, and you can do the build here. So I think of us as icebergs and also organizations as icebergs. So, you know, very little is visible, as I've been saying, and so much is going on underneath the waterline. From left to right, I'm always adding to this, by the way, because people are always coming up to me and sharing their story and their identities. Neurodiversity, immigrant status, our relationship with the carceral system, our family status, the fact that I'm sober and in recovery, but I cover that and, you know, like just avoid work mixers, you know, back in the pre-pandemic world, thinking about after hours celebrations that involve alcohol, things like that. On the right side, also mental health, you know, just enormous sort of things that have been exacerbated, particularly this past year. The good news is I think 2020 sort of forced us to lower our waterline because we really had no choice. We were struggling to perform and just literally show up every day and do work that was expected of us in the same way. I mean, it just wasn't possible for so many of us, depending on our circumstances. So the waterline has been challenged, but I think that doesn't mean our work is done. What we've got to do, I think, collectively is look at where we set our waterline to keep ourselves psychologically safe. And I get that. I've done it. I still do it probably. But I think the challenge for us is to lower our waterlines, get comfortable being uncomfortable, and bring more of our full self into each interaction. Particularly leaders need to do this so that it sets the tone that this is the way we are going to generate belonging in our organization. And, you know, the older generations, I'd say, are least comfortable with lowering the waterline. I mean, that probably goes without saying. And the younger generations really desperately, I think, want to and expect to bring their full selves to work. So we have this clash of generations of like, what is a reasonable place to set the waterline? Because my generation, I can tell you, it wasn't about our personal life and work. You know, it was very separate. And it was considered unprofessional, I think, to raise a lot of these issues. And that's why organizations aren't better at dealing with, truly dealing with and supporting all of these dimensions under this waterline, because we have been covering for great reasons, for important reasons, but also organizations then aren't challenged to acknowledge the diversity dimensions that exist and are, you know, widespread in a workforce. And so it's sort of you know, cover my eyes, I don't want to know, but that's not an organizational strategy. That's not sustainable, particularly coming out of 2020 when we really have to deal with all these things that we haven't really named in the past or dealt with. Thank you. So next slide. Oh my gosh, I'm going to do a time check. Okay. So one kind of reflection on privilege. I find it fascinating, and it's been such an aha moment, and I hope it's helpful for you to think about the fact that we all have marginalized identities, most of us. There are a few people I meet who say, Jennifer, I have no marginalized identities at all. I have this privilege, I have that privilege, I have like the whole list. And I say from whatever our makeup is, we can always take action. So for me as an LGBTQ woman, I need my male allies and I need my straight allies, just to do two examples. I need that solidarity, right? That championing, that sponsorship. But I also, in the last couple of years, have awoken to my white identity. I've awoken to a million other privileges that I might have, whether that's being, I don't know, if I'm an extrovert and I feel more comfortable presenting all day long, you know, it enables me to be heard and perhaps differently and more comfortable and have more energy speaking all the time. If I have a school in common with someone, if I have a similar, I have like a Rolodex that I can open up and to benefit somebody else, if I can challenge something and have permission to do so and tell the truth and get away with it, right? And not pay a penalty for that. there's many things that I can do based on the identities that I carry that can be in solidarity with voices that aren't being heard. And so it's sort of the Rubik's Cube or the puzzle, like we can turn it different ways and see different parts of ourselves. And I believe that those of us with privilege, with a small p, meaning any sort of power, access, comfort, safety, permission, we need to be activating those things. We need to be participating much more in changing systems and removing obstacles and challenging the way we've always done things. And so far from people of much privilege kind of sitting on the sidelines and saying, well, I don't know about this and I don't know what I could do. There is so much we can do. There's so much. So I like that it de-weaponizes the word privilege. And I think that's important because that's kind of the dominant narrative out there. And it actually just looks at it to me as the things I just said, which is power, access, ease, comfort, safety, permission, social capital, professional capital. All of us, each of us, no matter who you are and how many marginalized identities you have, we also have levels of privilege where we could be opening doors and we could be activating it. So, you know, as you sort of inventory your own identities, think about how you can be, you know, both sides at the same time. It's really a both and it's a beautiful opportunity to change outcomes for others. So on the next slide then, I came up with the Inclusive Leader Continuum, which is the model in my second book, which was mentioned earlier, How to Be an Inclusive Leader. And why I came up with a model is people love models. They're very easy to understand. They're easy to remember. And I want to go through each one of these quickly and explain them. And then if you take the Inclusive Leader Assessment, it will give you a report out on where you are on a couple key metrics. But know that, you know, no instrument is perfect and we're all works in progress. And so let me start with unaware, which is phase 1. Unaware is, I don't know there's a problem. I'm sort of phoning it in when it comes to supporting DEI. Unaware can also be, I'm a good person. So I don't think I'm really biased. You know, I believe in equality. And I would say to that, you know, values don't equal impact. We can believe we're good people, but it doesn't equate to me to shifting systems around us, right? It doesn't equate to me to using our voice. So being well-intended or having a personal beliefs needs to be actioned in the world. Like that's really what matters. And I hope that that learning was very clear, I think, coming out of last year, but it's always been really important. So, and unaware can be resistance too, active resistance, sort of, if I give you more, it means less for me. So there's a real, I think, scarcity mentality alive in people who are unaware, thinking this is sort of a bad thing for them to embrace this conversation. So on the next slide, when we want to move from unaware, of course, to phase 2, which is aware. So we want to wake up. We want to realize, oh my goodness, there is a problem. There is a gap. Oh my goodness, I do have biases, because if you're human, you have bias, like newsflash. We are all very imperfect. And oh my goodness, there's so much I don't know. And I think 2020 was an intense year for our awareness raising. So much we were not taught in our schools. So much, I think, apathy on the part of people who didn't think this applied to them and to us. And so aware then is an opportunity to just read and listen and absorb media and put ourselves in rooms, virtually or otherwise, or places where we are not in a dominant group, so that we can listen, so that we can learn and hear new language. And it's a challenging phase because it can be very overwhelming. So the emotion, I always like to talk about the emotions and not just the skills. And I think with aware, the emotion might be excitement and overwhelm. There's so much to learn in so little time. And like, there's so many identities that I don't carry that I need to learn about in order to activate, right? As Jennifer is telling me to, there's a lot. And so, you know, I think the point is to bite off what we can chew, bite off what we can digest. I know for me, I'm constantly kind of canvassing different identities and trying to learn a little bit about each, so that I can begin to develop the competency, the language, and some kind of knowledge, so that if I am in the room and all of those other identities are not in the room, I can begin to use my voice. Like that's always my goal. And so from aware, we've been doing this work, right? Probably privately, lots of reading, lots of reflection, lots of listening. So and the next slide is our phase 3, which is active. So it's important that we don't just leave awareness and knowledge in ourselves. We've got to take it on the road. And this is where we try and fail and try again. We are going to fail just as often as we're going to get it right, because a lot of us are developing a new competency, a new language. We're using new words. We may do that imperfectly. We have to be okay, I think, with not getting things right. And we have to actually expect it. It's not just being okay with it. So expecting that, it's part of the learning process. We're going to get feedback. We're going to have to adjust and come back and try it again. But active is really where the rubber hits the road. And I use the example of, learning to ride a bike. If we fell off the bike and got back on, and each time we fell, somebody berated us and yelled at us and said, "Why don't you know how to do this?" It would be ridiculous, right? We needed to fall and get back up and fall less, and then not fall at all, and then be able to ride it really without thinking about it someday, right? And this is active is where we are building that muscle memory. And so what I would say in this stage is the prevailing emotion. You've got to be gracious with yourself, give yourself space, and give each other space and grace. This is where learners need to be, I think, fostered versus called out for making mistakes. Because I know that not a single one of us has ever sort of appeared magically with a new skill set and done it absolutely perfectly. So I prefer the calling in concept for this stage, to say, hey, I would love to invite you to a conversation about what you said. I might want to give you some different language. I would coach you this way. And I think we have to have each other's backs, because, we've all been in that learner place about a different identity that's not our own. And so that space and grace is really key. And then finally, once we develop this muscle and get really good at it, we're riding the bike and texting, hopefully not, and eating pizza or whatever, no handlebars, that's really advocate, meaning I am comfortable, I'm confident, I'm fearless. I literally see D&I issues as if I'm breathing. It's part of every room I come into. I notice things. I have no fear about giving feedback. I challenge the system. I ask questions about why do we do it this way, and why hasn't this been fixed, and how can we do it better next time. So it's that really, I think, dedicated, consistent advocate that agitates the system. And so on the next slide, I just want to make one more point. We're going to go back to the model. We can be a lot of places at once. So you're probably listening to this thinking, I wonder where I am. And for me, I'll share, I feel like I'm multiple places depending on what identity that I have in mind, So advocacy, phase 4, I might be an LGBTQ plus, I might be extremely familiar with that community. I've been in it, right? It's part of my lived experience. But even within that community, there are so many identities that are poorly understood and represented that I don't carry. So I'm white identified, I'm a cisgender person, I identify as queer, but there's many other levels of abilities. There are other kinds of privilege I've noticed in the LGBTQ community that call me to action in terms of inclusion, to make sure our community is representative and diverse in all the ways that it always has been, but has not necessarily been, I think, encouraged. And we haven't been aware of who is benefiting the most from LGBTQ advocacy, because it's always those folks of privilege that tend to benefit the most from the way that we've tackled advocacy in the past and activism in the past. So I have to go back in the continuum, study again, review, get more language, and then practice it in active and kind of get my sea legs, and then hope that someday I'm advocate, but really it's an aspirational phase 4. And I always make the point that this is a journey. It's not a destination, and we're never finished and we're not done. Unfortunately, we have to think about ally as a verb, and it's not a destination, it's a journey. And it's also, you're only an ally if someone in an affected community considers you an ally. So it's something we earn, hopefully, that we are working towards, but it's not something that we can call ourselves. And I always bear that in mind, and I don't call myself an ally. I always say aspiring. And I like other words like accomplice, co-conspirator. They each have different energy, And I like them all, and it just depends. Sort of, it's a matter, I think, of personal preference. But anyway, I want to give you some alternates for language as well, in case you feel comfortable with different wording. And so that's what I brought for you today. And I went a little tiny bit over, but I want to move over into the Q&A now and engage with the team and get some of your questions answered.
Thank you, Jennifer. That was amazing. So grateful to have you here with us today. Great nuggets of information. We do have quite a few questions, so we'll try to cover as many as we can. The first that I will ask here from the questions we received is, do we cover for fear of being ostracized?
Yes, of course we do. Of course we do. When we are, in an underrepresented community, we are very aware of our identity. And we may not be ready to fully, be out and proud about all of those things, particularly invisible dimensions, right? That we can downplay because we have our hands full dealing with what people can see. If I'm the only woman in a room, at least as far as my perception, right, what I see, which is not always accurate, as we know, with gender identity. But if I am, I then hesitate to also kind of pile onto that being LGBTQ. I definitely think about that and I wonder. And so I know that experience is shared. My Black woman friends, they'll say, well, I walk into the room and here's what they see, like it or not. And I have to deal with that. But I also, struggle with mental health issues, but I would never talk about that, because I'm already dealing with so much fatigue related to my identity. So it is real. And unfortunately, organizations propagate this through the fact that microaggressions go unchecked, biases aren't addressed through proper strategy and training. And so I think largely, unfortunately, our organizations are sort of blind to the fact that so many of us are laboring to bring our full selves to work, and we're laboring in systems that weren't built by and for us. And so at every turn, you're encountering something that was not built with you in mind. So that's like a really important thing to understand. This is where we're at. I mean, like it or not. And this is why when we talk about equity, the equity lens is that lens that enables us to say, okay, so which systems and processes weren't built by and for all of us? And how can we address that and rebuild it? And sometimes it's a wholesale rebuild. Sometimes it's some tweaks and incremental change. But that's really that equity question that is so important. And coming out of 2020, you'll see equity everywhere. To me, that's what it means, is to say, so if we now understand the playing field isn't level, which I know we all understand on this call, but many, many people think it's level. Many people think, oh, well, just because, of course, it's a meritocracy, and of course we're fair. We have tons of women and people of color in our leadership. We don't have a pay gap in our organization. Meanwhile, my consultants and I come in and we find all those things. We find evidence of all those things, and people are shocked and dismayed and horrified. Of course, there's a kind of bias called self-affirmation bias. We don't want to think that we have participated in an inequitable system. Of course we don't. And so, but what the wake-up call of 2020 is to say, this is everywhere. It is everywhere. It has not been addressed. The workplace was built by one group of people largely, and it works for that one group of people. And we have so much work to do. So I'm just hoping the winds of change that were created in 2020 are going to, speed us along to do the work that we are very, very overdue in doing, so that we don't need to cover so much, because all of our identities are embraced and named and normalized. I like the word usualize instead of normalize. So all of our identities are usualized in the workplace. I mean, imagine being able to, for example, talk about mental health openly. Imagine being able to get the support we needed and not have it be stigmatized, and not worry that our career is on the line, or not worry that our manager doesn't understand and thinks that, we have to be separated from the organization when mental health challenges are felt so broadly by so many of us. So we can imagine what kind of system would be in place where that wouldn't occur anymore. And it's training, it's strategy, it's a lot of different things that we work on with our clients, but a lot has to be improved. And I mean, you are not imagining any of what I've talked about today. It is widespread, and it hurts us. It hurts our institutions. It exhausts us. It's bad for our health to cover every single day, multiple times a day. And we have to work to right size this because it's not sustainable. Thank you for the question.
That was a really good question. And Jennifer, thank you so much for talking about mental health. I think that's especially important. It's always been important, but it's especially important right now when people are dealing with so many different, what we're calling the triple pandemic, right? We have the pandemic with COVID. We have we had a very intense political environment. We have social justice issues. So there's a lot that people are carrying right now. And mental health is a very important issue to cover. So thank you so much for touching on that.
Absolutely.
The next question I'd like to ask, and there's a common theme in the chat around a question, this particular question is, what advice would you give a white male in helping bridge the diversity gap so other non-white males can have the same privileges that they struggle to obtain?
Oh gosh, my short answer is power sharing. And like I talked about earlier, I think we haven't done a great job of engaging our potential allies and accomplices in that group in order to usualize what it looks like to see and experience a straight white male who's on this inclusive leader continuum, right, is on the journey and talking about it and learning and, making mistakes and being resilient and, just role modeling what it looks like to be in that identity and walking this path. So we need more examples of that. And then I think people watch other people that look like them, right? We often say, think about Kamala and like just what she has unleashed in terms of possibilities for little Black girls, little Asian girls, right? And so for our straight white male leaders, similar, you've got to see it to be it. I feel like people expect people that look like me to be bringing this message. But what's really amazing is to dance and learn and be, on camera with people people don't expect to know about this or have any competency with it, and to see that role modeled and hear what it sounds like. And so what I try to do is I literally sometimes have to give language. And they say, what am I supposed to say? How do I start? How do I approach this topic? How do I, what if I make a mistake? I'm afraid, I'm hesitating. And, I guess my answer to all that is good. Great. You're not alone. But what's most important is you continue particularly to learn and then activate that phase 3 of the model. And that we talk about, I'm going to mess up. I am learning. It's all like learning a new language. I'm understanding my own biases for the first time. I'm starting to question and use my voice, particularly with how we do things, because what this group has to understand is they have a disproportionate amount of power in institutions. And when I say power, I mean capital, I mean access, I mean permission, I mean the ability to make a decision quickly that would take Tandra, you and me, years to push, right? From the bottom, if we're in the bottom, when you have somebody that's a champion at the senior levels who also is part of a majority identity saying, this is going to change and I'm making it so right now, it happens quickly. It happens quickly. So I think our goal should be to foster that understanding, that journey amongst and alongside those who have that kind of capital to use. In doing so, sort of teaching what this looks like and then activating that person, supporting them to activate themselves and activate other people that look like them, and to role model that, because the messenger for this work matters as much as the message. And I feel like, like I said, those of us who are in marginalized communities, like we are the squeaky wheels, right? We're constantly using our voice. The question to me is, who is not using their voice? Like that could be in the communities of identity that have more, that dominate the power structure as it is today. And by the way, I don't want to ever imply that all of us don't have huge power, because we do. And we are using it, right? We are using it to influence the workplace. We are using our voice. We are bringing our full selves to work and like telling our stories, and we're doing everything, but we can't create enough change quick enough without the participation of people in the majority group and in the senior leadership ranks. It's critical that we do this together, and we can all do different things differently. You know what I mean? Like, we can't replicate the work, but yet we all have these puzzle pieces that we need to bring together and put together in order to create lasting change.
Thank you. Another question we have here, or a statement and a question, is there is a great Navajo proverb that says, "You can't wake someone who is pretending to be asleep." What do you suggest in those cases? And can they be awakened and engaged on the continuum?
I love that quote. So good. Yeah, I mean, I think about waking people up that actually are asleep. There's a lot of work there too. But pretending to be asleep is I'm a good person. I think that's the pretend. I don't know how you all interpret the pretending to be asleep. I'd be kind of curious. The I'm a good person, or what do you mean? Like, we've sent everybody to training, or, what do you mean? We have great representation in our organization and everybody feels that opportunities are equally shared, right? Or the playing field is level. So in some cases, Robin DiAngelo, who wrote White Fragility, says often there is nothing more dangerous than a well-meaning white progressive, which really sticks with me because guilty as charged. But the pretending to be asleep to me is I think the abdication of responsibility and almost the belief that I'm doing enough. And I can tell you all, none of us is doing enough. I hope that that's clear in what we've been shown in this very difficult year, when so many people told us the truth this past year about their experience, about things were named for the first time, things were so vulnerably shared and so experienced deeply, so much pain, so much loss. And I feel like we can't pretend to be asleep anymore when we've been shown so many equity issues. There's no excuse for not understanding these things, and how even just the pandemic has been experienced differently by different communities of identity. And I could just go on, but I had trouble explaining equity issues until this past year, when I feel like it's everywhere. It's finally sort of coming alive for people. And I think we have like these huge tailwinds now behind us for this conversation. So, but when somebody's pretending to be asleep, I'd say we always want to meet learners where they're at. And like I said, kind of call in the conversation. So I would have them read White Fragility. A lot of books about whiteness are probably really important for people at that place. And the shame piece is tricky, because if somebody goes into a lot of shame as a result of being awoken, sometimes that can be really paralyzing too. And so I always do this dance around, guilt is not the same as shame. It's a really interesting nuance, but it's important to think about. And Brene Brown, for those of you who are fans, had a wonderful podcast on the difference between guilt and shame. I would recommend thinking about, guilt is, I didn't do something, or I did something that I regret and I want to be different. Shame is, I'm a bad person. And so if somebody goes away from the conversation because the message they get is, okay, now I'm understanding I'm a bad person, it's difficult to activate and learn from that place. So, how can we hold accountable while being welcoming onto the journey and letting people know that this is really doable? This is a muscle that can be built. This is something that can be learned. This is something that we can support each other together to move through. Because I do think there's a lot of overwhelmed, kind of fearful people out there. And I wake up in the morning and think, how can I encourage people to feel this is something that will make them a better leader, a better human, prepare them for the future in a really important way? Because when you are asleep, what that means to me as well on this topic is that you're not prepared for the future. You're not prepared for how diversity will impact your family, or already is. You're not prepared to, flex with the changing world. And so sometimes when I say to leaders, I give them a little tough love, and I say, if you choose not to engage with this stuff, all you're doing is really hurting yourself, because you're not going to be ready. You're not going to be prepared. You're not going to be equipped. You will not have developed the muscle that you need to be able to lead into the future. And for companies, they've got to be doing this work, because this is literally the difference between survival and not. It is the companies and the brands that engage and make those mistakes and learn and come back and push themselves. Those are the organizations and people who are going to thrive in the future. Those of us who know how to manage across difference and build trust across identities and understand, like everything I've been talking about today, those are going to be the most resonant leaders of the future. And so opting not to engage means that you're sort of choosing not to equip yourself. And so sometimes speaking about it that way helps, because it takes it out of this moral piece of whether I agree or not with something. To me, this may not, it is a moral issue personally. For me, of course it is. But as a consultant, we learn that we have to speak about things in a variety of ways in order to meet learners kind of where they're at and create an aha moment. So sometimes it'll be a story that changes someone's mind. Sometimes it will be a piece of data that really surprises somebody. Sometimes something will happen in somebody's personal life that will change the whole thing. Like their kid coming out to them as transgender. I have a lot of parents coming to me and saying, oh my goodness, like I was not ready. And now I use that example in my talks to say 1 in 5 people under the age of 35 identifies as non-straight and non-cisgender, 1 in 5. So that's your future workforce. That is the people in your family. Those are the young people in your communities, in your schools. And so, you know, to discount the importance of this, I guess I just don't understand from a practical perspective. But I would give you all, just remember, you may need to switch your tactics and your tools as you meet people where they're at, and you just never know what's going to unlock someone and get them onto the journey. But we need to get creative about how we sort of lay out the groundwork for that. And I think that's really an amazing challenge that we all have, and makes us smarter and better at what we do every day.
Thank you. We'll see if we can squeeze 2 more questions in here. We had one question that states, how can equity not be perceived as political?
Oh.
Everyone I talk to always brings up the political points of view of equity. How can I encourage people to have action-based equity conversations, and how to talk about how politics affect equity? I know that's kind of long, Jennifer, so if you need me to repeat any of it, let me know.
Yeah, they're a little related, it's kind of separate, but and the politics question is really tricky. It's sort of a third rail for workplaces that I study, because companies usually have stated values, and those values are around inclusion and equity, and so that someone like me who's LGBTQ feels I can bring my full self to work without feeling I'm in danger because of somebody's religious beliefs. And I always think it's interesting when you flip that around. I am not endangering someone else by being LGBTQ plus. And so it's sort of this debate that goes back and forth about like whose voice matters, I suppose, right? But what we always come back to is that if we're in a diversifying world, we need to then reflect that diversifying world in our workforce, right? That mirroring has to be there so that we can build better products and services for a diversifying world, right? If I'm not around that table and we think we want to target the LGBTQ community with our marketing, say, it is a $1 trillion buying opportunity. We have massive spending power as a community. If I'm not at that table, bringing my insights and my lens, chances are that product that's being developed is going to fail. That campaign is going to fail. And so I think that equity issues are business. It's really business proposition issues to me. And so if we can speak about them in terms of, we're not just equalizing or working towards equity as a feel-good exercise. We're not just doing it for optics. We need to have an equity lens so that we can get underneath what is getting in the way of performance and belonging for all identities. because when things get in the way of belonging, they impact our ability to be creative together. They impact our ability to trust each other so that we can do great things together, you know? So I think bringing it around in that way, at least with people who don't think it's a worthy endeavor in and of itself, which again, I keep kind of saying is a reality. And I know you all know that. But I think I don't know, I think that's a very powerful argument for equity that doesn't necessarily have to do with justice for its own sake, although it is justice, truly it is justice. It's more the way I talk about is if we do this, then imagine what will be possible. And it's the way that we connect those dots that I think hasn't been maybe done or maybe familiarized with people and the way they think about it. But justice is interesting. We're starting to talk more about justice. And in fact, practitioners are they're playing with 𝘾EDI, which is justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, 𝘾EDI. And I love that. I think it's fabulous. And some people could say, well, what role does justice, play in organizations? Well, being just and being fair and creating an environment where everybody feels the psychological safety to be together, to create together, is it creates a stronger institution, and it enables us to attract the best and brightest talent so that people feel seen and heard every single day in doing their work. And so anyway, to me, it's such a slam dunk. Like I don't ever understand sort of what the debate is about. So I guess what all I'm saying is to have, like, cast this discussion with the language that you want to. And when you get hit with something that's a limiting belief or the scarcity mentality, or if we undertake this, there's going to be less for me, I would just take that opportunity to redefine in the way that you've been hearing me do today. Because sometimes when we describe things in a certain way, somebody says, oh, I didn't think about it that way. I didn't understand that. And that it can be the beginning of a shift, in perspective and in participation with these things. The political thing, is to me TBD. Coming through the last couple of weeks, right? It's just been intense to realize the level of, I think disagreement. We've all known this, but it's been very apparent, particularly last week, that there is a lot of political diversity in our organizations. And I would say, the values that we carry outside of our companies are our business, and that always has been true. But when we come into work and we work for an employer, and that employer has certain expectations around leadership behaviors, that is where I think the values separate from the leadership behaviors and expectations, because most companies I work with have made the statement over and over again that, like, hey, this is important to us. It's honestly what the next generation really wants to see and hear and experience is an inclusive environment where we all feel safe to be together and come every day, virtually or otherwise. So I think that we have to differentiate between those things, and then companies need to take a stronger stand about what they will and won't tolerate from a behavior perspective. And again, always bring it back to our world. We want to resonate with our world. We want to resonate with incoming talent, particularly. So 35 and under, think about their values, their view to inclusion. It's very revealing to study Generation Y, which is millennials, and then Generation Z coming up behind them, that value inclusion as like a necessary. It's a necessity for anywhere they work. And they want their employers to be public about their using their might in the marketplace on civic issues, on issues of climate change, on issues of equality and equity. So I just think it's a practical decision that companies are making too, to make sure that they're preparing their culture to really perform in a world where the dominant generations in our workplace really believe that this is important. So there's a practicality to this conversation too, that takes it kind of out of the values realm and puts it more into sort of how are we going to thrive as an institution, and how am I going to thrive in this institution given the values of the institution and given the voice we need to have in the world. So that may be how I would try to get around it, but I It's really TBD because I think this year is going to teach us a lot about how do we welcome more diversity of political views and still maintain an inclusive environment, right? That's going to be really interesting. So sorry for the non-answer. It's an interesting one.
Thank you, Jennifer. I think we ran out of time, but
I know.
Want to thank you so much for your expertise, your insight, and I couldn't agree more with you. Inclusion is a necessity, and it definitely is a journey, and we have to have the willingness to take this on and challenge ourselves to grow personally and professionally. So thank you so much. We appreciate everyone that joined today's call. Know that the educational webinar series is held every third Thursday of the month, and make sure you register for the next webinar. We will be sending out a recording along with a link for you to register. Our next one is, we're super excited because we're going to be covering Project 1619 and understanding its importance in your journey as an inclusive leader. So thank you all. Thank you, Jennifer, once again.
Thank you, everybody. Stay safe out there.
Thanks.